Well, as we move on in our conversation about the book of Proverbs, and that's really how I feel this. I feel like I'm just sitting down with you and having this conversation across the kitchen table or across the living room floor, and I hope that you feel that way too, because I'm just really trying to have a very honest and transparent conversation about the things and let you know that I go through the same kind of things you go through. I have the same lows. I have the same highs. I have things in my life that break my heart and disappoint. And one of those things he talks about here in verse 22 is, well, I'll read the passage and then I'll expound a little bit. He says, like a gold ring in a pig's snout is a beautiful woman who shows no discretion. Now, this is really interesting because that's quite a contrast. When you think about, first of all, this is being written by a Hebrew, a Jew, a follower of the Old Testament. It's being written by Solomon. He knows what the difference between clean foods and unclean foods are, and they were forbidden to eat pork. And so pigs were looked at as being really things to be avoided at all cost, even though they were eaten widely amongst the Gentile communities and world around them. In fact, they were amongst the Romans, it was one of their preferred meats. The point is that to the Jew, it was anathema. You did not eat it. You did not touch it. You drove them as far away from you as you can. And keep in mind, I've been to many of the woods and rural areas in Israel, and they have wild boar that live there today. So it was something that was part of their day-to-day life. But the idea of taking a pig that you didn't even want to touch and taking something valuable like a beautiful ring nose, and you put it in the snout of a pig, I mean, it makes no sense. The contradiction is so absurd that you'd say these two things should never be in the same room together. And yet, we all know, and we've all seen, and we all know people who are very attractive people on the outside. They may not only be physically attractive, they may be very cool, very hip. They may have great personalities, very charming. They may be fun and enjoyable to talk to and hang out with. And yet there's a dark side to their life, to things they laugh about, the things they engage in, and the pleasures that they enter into. And I think every one of us know this conflict, that when we became Christians, we had the crew that we hung out with, and suddenly the things that they enjoyed doing, we didn't feel comfortable doing anymore. And it wasn't like we were trying to say, we're holy now and you're not, but it was just like we saw those things through a whole different lens. We understood them in a whole different way. And so the thing I would say is that you don't want to be reactive in a judgmental sense to people saying what you're doing is sick and wrong and wicked. But at the same time, we know in our minds that those things many times are sick, wrong, and wicked. In fact, I was just thinking about reading an article the other day about this, the Super Bowl, where this guy's named Bad Bunny, and maybe you're familiar with it, who's going to be the entertainment. And this guy is a cross-dresser. He promotes homosexuality and transsexuality and all those kinds of behaviors. He portrays him in some of his videos as being Satan, and he's a cross-dresser and all these kinds of things. And, I'm sitting here thinking in my mind, why in the world would the NFL pick this guy? And actually, I'll probably get into that in a later podcast on my What the World's Coming To podcast. But the bottom line is I just look at that and go, I'm not going to watch that. Now, it's a big question whether I'll even take time to watch the Super Bowl, because after all, the team that I was most supportive of hasn't been there in a few decades, and I don't anticipate them being there soon. So I'm just a bad loser in that regard. But the whole point is that I hate the halftime shows. I mean, for the last several years, I found them offensive, and I found them unentertaining and banal and crass. And in fact, this guy, Bad Bunny, apparently was in it last year, which I fortunately missed because I think I was doing a tour in Israel. But be all of that. It's one of those kind of things that we understand how out of place and how distasteful are. And the hard thing is, we see people that we know and love and the world around us finding pleasure and enjoyment in that. And it kind of makes us go a little bit crazy. Because what God says is, I'm calling you to discretion. Now, what does it mean to be discreet? It means to have good sense, to make sound judgment, to be morally discerning. Moral discernment is something that comes because we know what the Word says, and we begin to see the contrasts in our day-to-day life. And it also becomes an inner wisdom that guides us in the choices and decisions we make. So here is someone who has all of the outward behaviors. We say, this is a person who is very attractive. In fact, if I'm me so bold to say, it kind of reminds me of Princess Diana, who seemed to be a really wonderful person, a very good-hearted person, extremely attractive. I mean, she had everything, looks and fashion and all this kind of stuff. And yet she found herself making really destructive choices that eventually led to an early death. I know if you're a conspirator and you think somebody killed him, well, okay, I'm not going to argue that point. But the whole point is this, that God has called us to live careful and circumspect lives where we recognize that the importance of who we are is not in the package we're wrapped in. It's not in our appearance. It's not in our age. It's not in our style. It's not in our presentation. It's really in what is on the inside. And something I've even learned in doing online stuff over the years is that, it's not about trying to present the slickest or most impressive package and get people to wow and all that stuff. I mean, the people who are producing my stuff do a good job. I don't understand any of it, but nonetheless, they do an amazing good job. But the whole point is, if the content that I share is empty, if it's vacuous, then people are going to get real tired of it very quickly. Because there is something in our soul that yearns for depth of character. And it's my belief that a lot of young people out there today are not looking for adults who are cool. They're looking for adults who are wise in the things of God. So anyway, just a word of encouragement. I really, really want to urge you guys, and you probably hear me doing it, don't give up on yourself and don't write yourself off and don't feel like you have nothing else to add. I've been there, and I understand the emotion, the feeling, the thoughts. There was a time in my ministry where I felt like, well, I'm probably at the end of my run and I should turn it over to younger people. And I had a young man who I was sharing this with, and he looked at me and he said, I believe God wants me to tell you something. And I said, what's that? He says, I think your best years are in front of you. And as I look back now, I think he was absolutely correct. In fact, the next time I run into him, he lives in Nashville, next time I run into him, I really want to say thank you for sharing that with me, because that encouraged me to stay in the battle. And I hope my words will encourage you as well. Anyway, we'll pick this up tomorrow as we continue on looking at verse 23. God bless you and go in His grace.